Our next interview is with Pat and Alan Ahearn, owners and operators of Quill Brush, authors of several books on book collecting and book values. And I think the first question that everybody would like to know is, how the hell did you guys get into the book business? I mean, where does it come from?
You want to go ahead?
Sure. It came from our love of reading. We like to read. Alan was in college when we got married, and he had a professor who told the class that if you're going to buy a book and you're going to buy it new, check and see if it's a first edition. Doesn't cost you anymore, and that's how we started. That was back in 1959.
Wow. And you were in college at the time?
Yeah.
What school?
Maryland University. I got out of there in 60. And we actually started dealing in Alan Ahearn first editions in 1961.
Wow.
But I was working at the government. I'd gone to work for the Navy. I was an English lit major. And I got a job in contracts in the Navy because a friend of mine was in personnel in the Navy. So I was buying airplanes during the Vietnam era. And
wow.
We did it part-time until we opened the Quill and Brush, the store in 76, which was a book and art store that Pat ran. And then, of course, I quit the government in 80. And the rest is history.
The rest is history. Do you have any fond recollections of your early days in the trade? People who you met who were helpful, who were influential, who you looked up to as sort of mentors?
Larry McMurtry. Larry had a bookstore during that early period. He had it for a very long time afterwards as well. Down in Georgetown, called Booked Up.
Yeah, I know.
And Alan had called him to go out on a collection buy that was monetarily way above our head at that time. And Larry was just such a gentleman. And he called me when he found out that Alan was working full-time in another job also. And he said, "Look, Pat, you have any trouble, you call me and I'll help you." And he did. He'd answer questions. He was great. Mm-hmm. And you try to pay that back. We have young people that we help today. Mm-hmm. That's how this trade works, and I think it's wonderful.
Now, Peter Krause was saying the same thing about being influenced by Herbert Fletcher when he was a teenager. And, it's great. We all have our people who helped us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, also back, I don't remember, the Washington Star in the 50s used to carry Golden in Your Attic by Bradley. So I used to read that. And I read, these first editions are worth so much money. And then I didn't really know, we weren't in the association, and so I didn't really know him. I met him once or twice. But I remember before he died, one time, I just talked to him on the phone, and I said, "Do you want us to keep this book going?" And he said, "No." I think he said Joe Stark in Ohio was going to finish it. I'm almost complete. He said, "I'm 95% complete the edition." And then he died, and I never thought much about it. And then the reps, when he had the open store, the Putnam reps would come in and sell me proofs, of the new books. And they would say, people are always asking us for a book on book collecting. We used to have this book. Why don't we have a book? And I said, well, I've got a book on book collecting. Because we had one we self-published. And so they went and sold it to Putnam, and that was book collecting. And then after they got that, they said, "No, that's not the book we want. We want the Bradley book." Yeah. So I talked to Putnam. Putnam said, "Well, we gave them a $5,000 advance," and they said they never delivered the book. Supposedly the wife was going to deliver it or the daughter was going to deliver it. So they said, as far as we're concerned, if you're interested. And so that was another, I guess, somebody who influenced us, or over the years.
How many editions has your book values gone through? Is it you've done 2 of them, haven't you?
We did book collecting, which is like a primer on book collecting, and it had first books, which was always my hang-up. I used to collect first books. We did that in '89. Putnam published it. We had published it 3 times before that. And then in '92, we did the first collected books, which is the 20,000 books, the one everybody uses. And then it was 95 for the book collecting, 98 for collected books, 2000 for the book collecting, and 2002 for collected books. There was 3 editions of each one of them over that period.
Did you find that when the internet came into existence, did it play a negative influence on the books that you published?
It did in that, I think when they did the first one, it was a $50 book, and they did what, like, I think 16, 17,000? Is that what it was, Pat? Something like that. Wow. And then, which was a lot, you know. And then the second one, the 98, they probably sold about 13 or 14. That was a $75 book. That was still pretty good. But then, when they did 2002 on the collected books, I don't know. I'm not sure they sold more than 7,000 or 8,000 because I think everybody feels, well, the information's on the internet. I don't need it. But we weren't killed like most price guides were, because most price guides were just compilations of dealer catalogs.
Right.
Whereas this, the reason why people keep buying this book, and even, we're going to do another edition probably next year or so, is because of the bibliographical information in there. And that's what they really buy it for. The prices are okay. But there's still need. But I think we could always do 3,000 or 4,000 and sell them.
I'm sure.
What's fun is that we tell them on the Common Book to go to Abe and to go to the various sites and compare your book and be sure to compare points and what have you. And it's sort of a standardized answer. And so Abe now tells them whenever anybody says, I can't find, they send them to us. Library of Congress sends them to us. Libra sends them. So now instead of somebody buying the book, they're getting free answers.
I'm trying to figure out a way to get paid for this.
You let me know. We can all get in on that. Since the internet has come into play, what aspects of the book business do you think have dramatically changed?
I think all of the cheaper books got really cheap, and the scarce books got really expensive because the true scarcity was known.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we had a different market.
Yes,
well,
we
you
did.
got ABE now is over 100 million books, so you've got what you really have, the total availability is visible, whereas before it wasn't. So many of us were guessing. Example: a couple of months ago, somebody asked me for a Patrick O'Brien, and it was like a $500 book, first edition. And there were 6 copies on the net, 4 in England, 1 in Australia, and 1 in New Zealand. So I'm saying, well, now in 1995, if you've been looking for this book, this would really be a rare book in America. There aren't any, and there'd be no way of knowing they were anywhere else. I mean, that's, So, but now and what you find is the books used to sell for $75. There's now 200 copies of them, and they're selling for 8 or 10. But the books used to sell for 500, maybe you're selling for 1,500 because they find out there aren't any anymore, or they're none in good shape.
What do you think about the phraseology that I've heard from some booksellers who have said, since the internet, my inventory has lost a third of its value?
It's probably true for some people.
How did it affect your stock? You have a big stock and you have an important stock. How did it affect you when it first?
We lowered prices on the lower books.
That's probably true because, if you look at it, if you have 15,000, 20,000 books, you have a lot of, let's say $25 to $50 books or $75 books. And a lot of the $50 to $75 to $100 books are now maybe 8 or 10 or $20. So when you say, did you lose a third of the value, that's probably true. A lot of these books are just unsaleable, basically. But I think on the mid, once you get over a few $100s, and then up, they probably have held their value. They certainly haven't gone down a third.
But there has been, as Pat said, the cheaper books have gotten cheaper and the scarcer books have gotten more expensive.
And we segregated those books. We segregated those books, and we actually let some young grandchildren catalog them under a different name.
That's right. It's the employer of last resort.
It taught them the basics of cataloging, basics of selling, and they learned it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Did you have much of a problem transitioning from your traditional book business into an internet-based book business?
No.
It was easy for you to just
The reason it was easy was we had a son-in-law at that time who was very, very adept with the computer. And he wrote our first program for us. And he had a shop right around the corner from us. So I could yell. I had somebody I could yell.
And yelling at this.
And he would come and fix it for me.
Yeah, but
now I got daughters that can do that.
And we still have, But the book trade was really sort of set up for it. We were the first ones to go. We had everything sort of inventory, and all we had to do was upload it. So that I think from that perspective, versus a lot of people who sold inventory that weren't used to that. But if you did catalogs, you pretty much had everything on a computer. So I thought that made it easier. And then for us, for instance, over the years, if somebody doesn't buy after a year or two or whatever, you drop them. Well, the nice thing about the internet, it has a lot of bad things. As far as reducing prices, one of the things you can do is you can push a button and send 3,000 notices out to people who dropped and said, we got this catalog. If you'd like to go see it, you can click here and go see it. And you see why, for the most part, you drop those people. But occasionally, they'll buy a book. But that's amazing. So that's a plus, at least, for the internet.
If you were entering the book trade today, what do you see as like the major things that you would have to do, other than have money?
Yeah. Money is the key thing. You have to have an inventory. If you're just coming into the book business, we've seen some bookstores fail where people have been putting together this grouping of books that they're going to open this bookstore with. They have no backlog. They think that they're going to sell that book, live off of their profits, but they're not reinvesting in their inventory. So they sell like crazy for a week or two, and then it gets less and less and less, and it fails. You have to be prepared to have a backlog that you can bring in.
You always sell what you just bought, that. It seems like you buy 100 books, you sell 50 of them, get your money back, and then you got the other 50 kind of go out. And a lot of people, when they get into it, and now it's expensive. It's hard to find good collections. A lot of the collectors put their stuff on eBay, or they put it up there. They're on ABE themselves. So a new dealer coming in, needs probably really. We never had much mentoring. Where people worked, I guess apprenticeship, not mentoring, but apprenticeships. And we probably it's something that more and more people should do now, the younger people, to actually work for somebody for 5 or 6 years and probably buy stuff on the side and then get a much better idea. I mean, I never worked in a bookstore. So I just always sort of made it up as I went along,
Well, most of us done that.
Yeah.
What do you think about the statement that I hear often is that nowadays a bookseller can get an instant education because of the internet? Do you buy that as a statement?
No, I don't.
How would you address that?
Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Truth of the matter is, they see things, they see words, they see explanations, but they don't know what it means, and they apply it to something else.
Right.
And it makes no sense. They've decided that they can do all of this shortcutting because it'll be all right. So they make up abbreviations that make stupid sense. They name companies after what they do. It's just, you can't learn that way. You were involved with the school teaching in Colorado. I think that is the way to go. If you love books and you want to get in books, that's what you got to do. You've got to go and work with people who have already done it. And I highly recommend that school.
But see, a lot of things, the biggest part was pricing in a lot of things. So they figure, I'm getting the pricing on the internet. But the problem is, as you know, when you go on the internet, there's a huge range. People say, I looked at this book and there's a $100 copy and there's a $1,000 copy. Gee, they look almost the same. That's why they shouldn't, But then it's like an auction wreck, Once you and I and Pat, we've all been in the business a long time, so you can read an auction, you'll say, the reason that was $5,000, for this book that's really a $500 book was that there was 2 crazy people there. But it really has nothing to do, But mostly, there's wholesale. The auctions are basically wholesale. But I think there is a perception of it. It's like our book. The reason the sales went down is a lot of people say, I don't need that's all the internet,
Well, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the young bookseller today, the bookseller who is perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 years into the trade?
I think they need to work with other booksellers. And you can see from our new young members, they have learned that. They have a senior member within the ABAA that works with them, and it's wonderful.
Almost like a mentoring.
It is.
Yeah, it's more mentoring than apprenticeship. Yeah. But we do have some younger guys, and we do have them, and they seem to be doing all right. I mean, been around 4, 5, 6, 7 years now, but They built up their stock, and they're, like Kevin at Royal Books, Harper, Hirsch. There's always think there aren't any. Everybody's 100 years old, but there are actually some, 30, 40-year-old
I always
guys.
thought that way. Even when I started in the trade, I thought everybody was 100 years old, and I was the only one who was like under 20. But there were others. Just didn't know who they were at the time.
Yeah. But they're out there, and they're doing all right. But I think it's just so much tougher because there's so much money required to get the good books.
It's a whole different ball game. I think
is.
than
It's
it
new.
once was.
Well, when I was working for the government, okay, and I'm doing it part time, you'd have McMurtry and Frank Gilliam and these guys, and they'd go to the Strand, or they'd go to Loudermilk's, and they'd go to all these big bookstores, and they'd have a list, and they'd sit there.
Yeah.
And they'd go through and they'd spend a week, and you probably did the same thing, and you'd buy all these books for $3 or $5, and you'd go home and you'd ship them off for $15. That was all gone by the time we opened the store in '76. That was like past history. Well, the library said, "We got those books. We don't need those. We want manuscripts now."
A friend of ours has a used bookstore that covers from really basic books, i.e. trash, all the way up to very, very nice things. And the business is so large that it's very difficult to keep track of everything. So you've got managers of areas and what have you. Employees are going with his want list, the owner's want list. And they go back and they shop his own store.
Well,
and then take them in there and sell them to him.
but isn't that what a book scout does?
We said that to the owner, and he said, "It works. It's a good system."
It's a great system.
This was before the internet.
With regard to the internet, what percentage of your business comes from the internet? What percentage comes from the store? What percentage approximately comes from your catalogs and your lists?
I did this. We'd had this interview with Fine Magazine, and I don't know whether it's true, but my guess was around 15% comes from ABE and the Libris and those type things, and about maybe 25% comes from our website. Somewhere around 40, and then we probably still do 25%, in catalogs. We went back to doing catalogs fairly fast because we found out people still buy from catalogs.
And then the rest, but they still do buy.
Yeah, but it's not like you're not doing the percentages, but it's actually getting better the last year or so.
Yeah,
I've
noticed that myself.
And then the rest of them are basically people we buy for. If we had more, I said, if I could get through.
Building collections.
I have one guy who said if I could duplicate him a couple times, we could just quit the rest of the stuff. But unfortunately, we only have one at a time.
Do you have any kind of philosophy about purchasing books through the internet? I mean, do you do any of that? You sit down at your screen and decide, okay, today I'm going to spend an hour looking for things.
I kept trying to get into eBay, and I've never been very good at eBay. But what happens with us is we have a guy who does these price guides, not the collected books, but the author ones.
He does research for us.
And he does research for us, and he gets all the catalogs, okay? And then he makes records of them, and he gets any variant, and this is how we keep these. They're bibliographical checklists with prices is what they are.
Yeah.
And we've done 174, and we're actually going to do some more. It's been a long time, but we've got about 30 more doing. We just did H.G. Wells at 80 pages.
Wow.
But what he'll do, it's funny, when he's updating them, he'll look on ABE, and he'll say, here's this book. Like there was one that was a Faulkner book. And it was, the last time it was sold, I can't remember who sold it. It was sold for like $500. It's a little pamphlet. It was called A Fairchild Story or something like that. I never even seen it. He said, well, there's a guy in England's got it for $12. He said, you probably ought to buy it. So the funny thing is there are actually buys on them, but you can't, it's not like looking, you can't find them because you're looking for a book. Now you told me that you would get on and just go look for like presses or look for, published place, that kind of thing.
I use bibliographical codes because even the most unintelligent bookseller knows how to copy. So I would go in and look for Wagner Camp, or look for Howes, or look for Cowan, or look for Graff,
right.
And things would come up. And most of it was too much, but some of it was just right.
Yeah, there are things on there. And the other, what I find funny is if you have a book and you go and there's none there, okay, and so and it's a scarce book, and so you price it. I don't know. I mean, it's not really you price it $1,500. You go back about 3 weeks later, there's 5 copies of them.
Right.
And
All of them
15,
less than
14,
you.
30. Yeah. They've been waiting, holding this book.
Yeah, everybody's been waiting for somebody to be bold enough to say what they think it's worth. Yeah.
We used to do that with the old A.B. Bookman.
Oh, yeah?
Do you remember the magazine?
Of course.
Yeah, we used it forever. And it was funny because you could advertise the titles you wanted, and you would get things from $1,500 down to $1.50, including postage.
They never worked. We used to get 10%. If you put 100 books in there, you get quotes on 10 of them. But there'd always been one book that would pay for it. There would be somebody quotes over $2 that was like a $200 book or something.
The predecessor to the internet in a small sense.
It's a shame he didn't.
Never understood Jake why he didn't. He had that market tied up.
Well, he did, but he approached the situation from a wrong angle, and it couldn't have worked.
We've all made mistakes like that.
It was too bad because I mean he was not a computer illiterate guy.
No.
I mean that's why it just seemed like an obvious thing for him to kind of transition over, but it just never worked.
He just didn't have the what it took, I think, to make it work. He came from an entirely different angle, and it just wasn't.
It had to be printed on paper.
Yeah, and it just.
And let's face it, we're that way. You'll never catch me reading a book on the internet. I don't like to stare at light.
No, I can't do that either. Well, we've got a couple of more minutes, and I just would like to have you both look at your crystal balls, if you were, and give us your prognostication on the future of the book business. Will we have a book business in 50 or 100 years, or is this the heyday of the antiquarian bookseller?
It may be today's heyday, but in my opinion, it's like antiques. There will always be someone who wants the books. It may change, phenomenally for the how they're printed, how many are printed. If the new book business goes down, it's going to make scarcer books for us later. So I don't know.
I think I was more pessimistic than I am now over the last few years. I always thought we used to have a big remainder house named Daedalus there. The best remainder house, I think, in the country. These probably still are. And I would go over there and see 5,000 copies on a skid of T. Cordes and Boyle's first book for $1.98, and if you bought $100 worth of books, you got 50% off, So we used to buy a lot of stock there, and we could buy it and price it $15, $20, and eventually we'd be selling it fairly high. But then I would notice, like 3 or 4 years later, that the books like they've disappeared. Now, part of that was people would put them in their basements or go to and you'd only see them at a little fair maybe. Because on the internet you can see it all, but there you had to actually go to the store or go to somebody's house, So these, they didn't, they would go up because there were copies, but nobody could see them. But eventually, like you look on the internet, you would look maybe 5 years ago, I'd look for like Agatha Christie in dust jackets, and there might be 5 copies. Might be 20 copies, there's 5 nice copies. Now you go back, there aren't any. Yeah. So, but what I learned from Daedalus was somehow these books got absorbed. It's a very shallow business. There aren't that many customers out there. But over time, they'll get absorbed. If there's 200 copies of a James Lee Burke book, it may never get absorbed. Yeah. But if you've got 5 or 10 or 15 copies and you got 100 million copies up there, don't be surprised in a year or two if those copies are gone. So I think that, the books we deal in, the antiquarian books and the books are relatively high value. I think they're going to hold up. I think it's always going to be collectors,
So you're a little bit optimistic.
I'm more optimistic than I was a couple of years ago,
Or than when he started that sentence.
Yeah, could be. Was it a paragraph?
Pat and Alan, thank you so much for participating in the project. I loved the interview. It was great, and I hope people who watch it feel the same way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for doing it.